Hey, it's Beata from BA English Coaching, and I am again with
David, hello.
and we are doing the passive. I told David that I tend to do the not so fun grammar with David, and I always choose the funny bits with Sarah, but somehow David is the one that can deal with the technical grammar or with the boring one or with the.
I try my best.
Yeah, so we are doing the passive. You will need to understand all the tenses. If you are not 100% confident with all the grammatical tenses, then this lesson unfortunately isn't quite yet for you, because we will review the whole passive tense today throughout this lesson. So you need to be confident. If you are not, first consolidate all the grammatical tenses and then you are free to watch this lesson. As always, this lesson is interactive. It is based on a context. So we have got a context about what? What is the context about, David? The text is about the river, the disaster, the flooding.
Events that you might see in a news item on the television, for example. Often the passive voice is used to report events which have happened to people and affected communities, natural disasters, volcanoes, flooding, that kind of thing.
We will talk about when we use the passive, how it is used, what's the difference between the active and the passive voice, what makes us decide which voice we should use. We always start with quotes.
All right.
Yeah, this is our tradition now. The first one is mistakes were made.
Okay, mistakes were made is the kind of quotation you might see in an official report. And it's a kind of catch-all phrase, but it's not particularly useful because usually the mistake was made by whom? Is it something that you want to solve? What are we going to do about it in the future? There needs to be a follow-up action to solve this mistake.
That brings us to the point where when we talk about the active and the passive voice, it is a bit difficult to understand when you are learning English, but also even for English people, I think it's a bit controversial because these days people are trying to avoid the passive voice because people don't want to take ownership of what they've done. So instead of using it in the active voice, they use the passive, but we will talk about it later. And this was a really good example. Mistakes were made, and we are not blaming anybody, which is not always the right thing to do.
No.
And there is another quote I like: I must do something always solves more problems than something must be done.
Okay, so something must be done is a phrase that is used by a lot of people a lot of the time, but it is so common that it really has lost its value and lost its meaning. But a much more active version of the same thing, as Beata's just said, is I must do something, and that means that you are taking ownership of the fact that you need to be seen to be doing something. George Orwell, as you know, was a very famous English author who wrote 1984 and Animal Farm. And he said, never use the passive when you can use the active. I'm not sure why he said it or when he said it or the context, but then I guess it's kind of what we were talking about a minute ago, is if you can use the active voice, it means that you are more likely to do something rather than have something done to you.
There are occasions where you have to use the passive, and definitely when you are preparing for an exam, when you are taking an English exam, this is what they like to test, whether you are able to transform the sentences from the active to the passive or the vice versa. So you need to know the passive voice, and also there are situations where you just have to use the passive, and we will explain why. Sometimes the best way to say what we want to say is to use the active voice.
So first example is, I didn't lose my watch. Somebody stole it at the party.
Why is it better to say I didn't lose my watch? Because the focus is on the...
because the
person.
focus is on the person. So I didn't lose my watch. It wasn't my fault. I'd lost it. Someone actively stole it from me at the party.
And the second?
Millions of people read the magazine. And the fact is you're drawing attention to the number. It's a very large number of people who actually read the magazine. So again, it's emphasizing the fact that a lot of people do read this magazine.
If we use the passive, then we have the magazine is read by millions. We use the passive because the focus is on the magazine.
Correct. Next one, I didn't jump. And again, it puts the emphasis on you as the subject because the passive version of that would be I was pushed.
But the focus I didn't jump is on I, on the subject I, and the I was pushed, that kind of, it wasn't my fault.
It wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault because they did something to me. The last one is everyone thinks I have resigned. So that's an assumption made by other people about something which has happened to me. But in fact, the passive version would be I have been sacked, which is something that has happened to me without my being involved.
You can see that there is a clear distinction between the active and the passive, and it all depends on the focus of the sentence. So that's one thing. Another thing you need to know.
A does something to B.
So this is a bit technical.
Probably if we look at the examples, it might make it clearer.
When A does something to B, there are often two ways to talk about it.
So if we want A, who is a doer, to be the subject, we use an active verb. For example, I wash my car every week. They built their house in 2000. So the active voice is that we say what the subject does. In this case, it's washing the car, building the house.
If we want B, the receiver of the action, to be the subject, then we use the passive voice.
So the example would be, my car is washed every week. Their house was built in 2000. So in other words, we are saying what happens to the subject.
And the object of an active verb corresponds to the subject of a passive verb. So you may have to pause the video and think about this. So if we have an active sentence, I wash my car every week, I am the subject and my car is the object. If we want to change it into the passive sentence, it then becomes my car is washed every week. So my car then becomes the subject.
So an easy way to remember it is to swap round subject and object if you want to change from active to passive.
And in most cases, the subject, so the person or thing doing the action of an active verb, is not expressed in the corresponding passive sentence. If it does have to be expressed, this usually happens in an expression with by. And the noun is called the agent. So if you want to mention the agent, because it's something surprising or interesting, or if you want to give credit to someone who did something, and then you use the preposition by and you mention the agent. We have prepared a short text. We would like you to read it first and choose the best verb. So one is in the active and the other one is in the passive. So pause the video now and read the text and try to choose and decide which one is the correct form. Now David will read the text with the correct forms, and you can always pause the video after and repeat after him to practice your pronunciation, intonation, expression, speed, and everything else.
Okay, this is a very interesting text because you probably will have noticed that if you watch the television news, particularly if a natural disaster has occurred, this is exactly the kind of language which the reporter will use in the TV report. So millions of pounds worth of damage has been caused by a storm which swept across the south of England last night. The River Test burst its banks after heavy rain. Many people were rescued from the floods by firefighters who received hundreds of calls for help. Wind speeds reached 80 miles an hour in some places. Roads were blocked by fallen trees, and electricity lines were brought down, leaving thousands of homes without electricity. Everything possible is being done to get things back to normal, a spokesman said. A spokesperson from the Environment Agency said the whole situation must be reviewed to avoid future flooding events.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
So how did you do? Was it difficult? Was it easy? Do you have any questions? And yes, we are going to talk about the passive in more detail now. So it doesn't give us headaches like this storm, for example, or all these other natural disasters. So if you look at the text again, when do you think we use the passive? What kind of situations are we talking about when the passive is the correct or the proper or the more appropriate voice to use?
Okay, first example, our TV has been repaired. John has been arrested. Our football team was defeated.
So from these examples, we can tell, hopefully, that we use the passive when the agent, so again, the agent is the person or thing doing the action, is unknown, not important, or it is obvious or clear from the sentence. So our TV has been repaired. It doesn't really matter who repaired it. It's not important. The main thing is that it has been repaired. So the action is more important. John has been arrested. It's clear because he has been arrested by the police. And our football team was defeated. Again, it is the action rather than the agent.
Second use is in formal styles of discourse. For example, it seems a mistake has been made in the invoice. An interview will be arranged. So the next example is to describe processes or procedures, and we are generally more interested in the process itself than who performs it. For example, the pills are packaged and wrapped in this part of the factory. 38 subjects were interviewed in the first round of interviews. The Earth was formed millions of years ago.
And the last one?
To avoid the implication of personal involvement or responsibility, for example, the vase got broken, Mum, some mistakes were made in that article. I know who did it, but I don't want to blame the person.
Some people will use the passive as a strategy that allows language users to avoid mentioning the agent and taking the ownership, and some people will criticize it. And I think this is what is happening in the language these days. Languages are constantly changing. They are flexible. And I think it's good to know about this.
Certainly, we live in the days of social media, for example, and it's becoming more and more obvious if you look into various social media platforms that a lot of people are using the active voice because they want to be more engaged, they want to take more responsibility, and people are expecting them to take more responsibility rather than to avoid criticism by using the passive voice, which is sometimes seen as getting out of something rather than taking responsibility for having done something.
Exactly. So it's not only knowing the grammar of it, but it's also knowing the context and to get the feeling for the language. You need to know when to use the passive and when to use the active and use it correctly. So we have all the tenses here. We will now tell you how they are used in the passive voice. And so we will start with the present simple.
I clean my car every week would be the active voice. The passive voice would be my car is cleaned every week.
With the present simple, we use to be plus past participle. With the present progressive,
I am washing my car today. My car is being washed today.
so with the present progressive or present continuous, we use again to be plus being plus past participle.
Next one, past simple. I cleaned my car last week. My car was cleaned last week.
So with the past simple, we use to be in the past tense, so was and were plus past participle.
In the past progressive, I was cleaning my car. My car was being cleaned would be the passive version.
So with the past progressive or past continuous, we use again to be in the past, so was plus were plus being plus past participle.
Next example is present perfect simple. I have just washed my car would be the active voice. The passive voice is my car has just been washed.
So present perfect simple passive is with have or has plus been plus past participle.
Next example, past perfect simple. I had washed my car. And the passive version would be my car had been washed.
So as you can see, the past perfect simple passive, we need had plus been plus past participle.
The next one is the future simple plus modals. I will, must, may, should wash my car would be the active voice. The passive voice is my car will, must, may, should be washed.
The future simple and all the modals, it's quite easy in English. You just put will plus be plus past participle, or you put the modals plus be plus past participle. And the last one?
Next one is the future perfect simple. I will have washed my car by lunchtime. And in the passive version, it will be my car will have been washed by lunchtime.
So future perfect simple is will plus have plus been plus past participle. As you can see, we do not use present perfect continuous, past perfect continuous, and future perfect continuous. These tenses are not usually used in the passive voice. You will need to pause this video, think about it, and you have to drill the forms. There's no way you will be able to use this. It's like timetables, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You just have to sit down, look at it, keep on writing it down, memorize these forms. There's nothing else. You just have to know if you say present simple in the active voice, how is it in the passive voice, and memorize it. And the same for each and every one of these tenses.